Hi there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Molly White. I'm from the New Hampshire Department of Education, the Bureau of Student Wellness, and I am so excited to be joined here today by Donna Plourde and Mike Posanka. Donna is the Executive Director at Real Life Giving, a New Hampshire nonprofit committed to fighting sex trafficking and exploitation through education and training, and to advocating for survivors and at-risk women through outreach, support services, and resiliency programs. She chairs the training committee for the New Hampshire Human Trafficking Collaborative Task Force. And Mike has served as the resident agent in charge for Homeland Security Investigations in New Hampshire for over 7 years. Mike is responsible for leading a team of law enforcement officers to investigate instances of human trafficking throughout the state in partnership with the New Hampshire Human Trafficking Collaborative Task Force. And I am going to pass it off to Donna to give us an overview of what human trafficking is.
Thank you, Molly, for the introduction and for the opportunity to share today. We appreciate you tuning in. Educators are in a unique position to identify youth who may be experiencing sex or labor trafficking. It's not uncommon for youth to continue attending school while they are still in their trafficking situation. And the school setting can provide an opportunity to identify and interact with a potential victim, to respond with empathy, and connect the student to important support services. In part one of our training, we want to make sure we're on the same page in our understanding of what human trafficking actually is and what it looks like in New Hampshire. Common myths or misconceptions, of which there are many, can inhibit our ability to recognize human trafficking. Even survivors themselves many times do not relate to representations they've seen in the media. I've heard survivors say, "I was never kidnapped," or "I wasn't in chains." So the basic definition, what is human trafficking? The basic definition is a simplified version adapted from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the federal law that was enacted in 2000, which made human trafficking a crime in the United States. And it says that human trafficking occurs when a person is compelled to provide labor or a service or to perform a commercial sex act through force, fraud, or coercion. Let's break that down further. It's important to remember that labor trafficking often occurs within legitimate industries. In New Hampshire, we've had individuals trafficked into domestic service, such as nannying or housekeeping, landscaping. New Hampshire actually has the distinction of having the second federally prosecuted case of human trafficking in the United States, which involved a tree service in Litchfield. We've seen individuals trafficked at restaurants and hotels, in agricultural work, construction, cleaning services, the health and beauty industry, such as, say, nail salons or massage businesses, panhandling, or even traveling sales crews, where individuals are selling candy or cleaning products or magazines and are expected to meet a quota each day. Of course, labor trafficking can involve distinctly criminal activities as well, such as the forced selling of drugs, where it is actually labor trafficking as opposed to what we usually consider drug trafficking to be. And a commercial sex act. When we think of a commercial sex act, we often think of prostitution, which would be correct. And we do see that. We see that in hotels, residences, on the street, illicit massage businesses. It can happen in escort services or even at truck stops. But it's important to know that someone can also be trafficked into pornography. I know of individuals who were filmed during their exploitation without their consent, with the videos being uploaded to various porn sites. It's incredibly traumatizing. Someone can also be trafficked into working in strip clubs or live shows. And webcamming, we're seeing an increasing number of people engaging in webcamming where a certain performance is requested and the financial arrangements are agreed to, and everything's facilitated online. A sex act is commercial when the act is performed in exchange for something of value. And that can be money, of course, but it could also be something as simple as a place to eat, something to eat, I should say, or a place to stay, clothing, drugs, or any gift item. And another distinction that's really important to remember is that when it comes to adults, force, fraud, or coercion must be present for it to be considered trafficking. But if a minor is engaging in commercial sex, there's no need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. The age of consent in New Hampshire is 16. However, if something of value is being exchanged, By state and federal law, it is considered to be sex trafficking. So what is force, fraud, or coercion? This is the last critical part of the definition. Force is exactly what it sounds like. It's some form of physical violence. It could be the use of restraints, confinement in some way, abduction, though that is a comparatively small percentage of the cases that we see. It far more often is something that involves grooming, really. But it could also be the forced use of drugs. Fraud is deception. It could be false promises about the terms and conditions of employment, or what someone might be paid, or even travel or educational opportunities that are promised. It could involve someone hiding their true identity. They might be presenting themselves as a potential romantic partner, or even a modeling agent giving out business cards at the mall, for example. Coercion is psychological, and that can be threats to the individual or those that they care for, family members, their children, friends, or even a pet. It could be threatening to report someone to DCYF and loss of custody, for example, or reporting them to immigration. Blackmail is extortion, perhaps using photos to gain leverage over someone. Manipulation can involve cycles of intense affection and abuse, similar to what we might see in domestic violence, for example, and keeping someone off balance, really questioning their judgment. Maybe it's they're being told repeatedly that they've made this choice, heaping on shame and humiliation. It's all about reinforcing power dynamics and exerting control. Now that we have a deeper understanding of definition, I'm going to hand it over to Mike, and we're going to take a look at what human trafficking actually looks like here in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Molly, for having us. In New Hampshire, trafficking in persons presents itself in a whole variety of ways. We see labor trafficking. In fact, as Donna mentioned, one of the first labor trafficking cases after the passage of the federal statute occurred right here in New Hampshire. However, today I want to focus on sex trafficking because I think high school students are most susceptible and will most often witness sex trafficking within their peer groups. There are 4 types of sex trafficking cases that we see most often in New Hampshire. Those cases include drug addiction. They involve intimate relationships, familial relationships, and forced webcamming or sextortion cases. These types of trafficking cases often overlap. In other words, more than one of these types of trafficking may appear in any given case. Next slide. This is the New Hampshire Human Trafficking Statute. It's based generally on the definition that Donna outlined earlier. Human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to perform a sex act or some kind of labor. The New Hampshire statute does a good job of clearly describing what we mean by the terms force, fraud, and coercion. The first type of sex trafficking that I'd like to highlight is sex trafficking by means of drug addiction, because this is the type of human trafficking we've seen most often in the state as a result of the opioid crisis. Opioid addiction, whether it be addiction to pain medication, heroin, or the synthetic drug fentanyl, is a dangerous affliction. Someone who is addicted to opioids and is actively abusing the drug is highly vulnerable to being trafficked because of the effect of the addiction on the person's free will. An abuser of opioids is constantly concerned about where and how they're going to score their next fix. They are deathly afraid of experiencing withdrawal from the drug. That's because during withdrawal, they become violently ill and often suicidal. They become controlled by the addiction, willing to do anything to obtain their next high, even engage in prostitution. Where there is this kind of vulnerability, there will be someone to exploit that vulnerability. We've seen opioid abusers rack up drug debts to a drug dealer, then engage in commercial sex acts in order to pay off their debt and perhaps obtain the drug to feed their addiction. They become involved with a human trafficker, perhaps to serve as a bodyguard and to otherwise set up commercial sex activities. These traffickers or pimps often become controlling and violent. The drug addiction, coupled with the violence, overcomes the victim's will, and the victim no longer has control over their own activity. The second type of sex trafficking I'd like to touch upon occurs when the victim believes they're in a loving relationship. In these cases, love, or something the victim believes is love, can become a coercive element. These types of cases are often coupled with violence and a high degree of manipulation. The cases we've seen involve the victim, most often a female victim, being swept off her feet by a charismatic boyfriend. The boyfriend may shower the future victim with presents, trips, and other signs of affection. Slowly, the significant other may become more controlling and will engage in activity that looks like stalking. Soon, the credit card bills will become due, and the boyfriend will not have the means to pay off the bills. So in order to keep this kind of lifestyle going, the boyfriend may convince the victim to engage in sex acts with another person in order to earn extra money. Once the money starts flowing in and the lifestyle is maintained, the boyfriend will not want the victim to stop engaging in prostitution activity. When the victim expresses a desire to stop, that's when the situation turns violent. The third kind of case I want to touch on real briefly is cases that involve familial relationships. We've seen parents sell sex with their children for drugs, and we've seen uncles exploit young family members for their own profit. Finally, we've seen webcamming or sextortion cases. As Donna described, these can become commercial sex act when the material is posted on pornographic websites. As I'm sure you realize, sharing compromising photos of yourself is extremely risky behavior. If the photos fall into the wrong hands, they can be distributed further. We've investigated cases in which the recipient of compromising photos demand more material from the victim. If the victim does not comply, the perpetrator threatens to share the photos they already have, perhaps with the victim's friend list. This is the type of serious harm that can be covered in the New Hampshire statute. These cases become extremely difficult to investigate when the victim has shared the photos with someone they only know through the internet. Offenders will establish fake identities online in order to perpetrate this crime. They may also use forums that are housed and managed outside of the United States, such as Omegle and Anon IB, to communicate with their victim and distribute the sexual images. They do this because foreign companies do not have to comply with US law enforcement requests. In other words, perpetrators who wish to maintain their anonymity may. In the next slide, we go over key points about human trafficking. The first point is initial consent is not relevant. Let's tie that back to the types of cases I've already described. A victim may agree to engage in commercial sex activity to pay off a drug debt and finance a drug habit. However, the victim has the right to stop that kind of activity at any time. Unfortunately, traffickers manipulate these relationships through the use of violence and other controlling methods to prohibit the victim from exiting the life. Similar examples may be drawn from the loving relationship scenarios as well as the sextortion cases. Second point is no movement, travel, or kidnapping required. The most sensational examples of human trafficking that we as the general public may see are those portrayed in Hollywood. In fact, when we go back to Donna's basic definition of human trafficking, the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone into a commercial sex act or some other kind of labor, nowhere is there a mention of movement, travel, or kidnapping. Those types of tactics simply are not needed to prove a human trafficking case. The third point is restraints and confinement are not required. Likewise, nowhere in that basic definition is there a requirement that restraints be used. Instead, the restraints are more psychological. The restraints are emotional manipulation and fear. Fear of violence, fear of drug withdrawal, and fear of the exposure of compromising information. I want to thank you for your time and attention to this important topic today. With that, I'll turn it back to Donna to provide you with more information about the anti-trafficking effort in New Hampshire.
Again, we appreciate your time in watching this video today, and we'd like to leave you with some further information. We invite you to watch, first of all, parts 2 and 3 when they become available of our training to learn about vulnerability factors, recruitment and control tactics, indicators, and key information on responding and reporting. For more information about the New Hampshire Human Trafficking Collaborative Task Force, we invite you to check out our website, which is listed here, and also for the latest updates across the state, including our partner organizations, follow the task force on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity today.